Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today I want to talk about Cenk Uygur's appearance on Piers Morgan Uncensored, because I found this interview to be equal parts hilarious and interesting, and I think it's worthy of a discussion. Now, I am fully aware that Cenk's nephew actually appeared on this program before, and that appearance was also hilarious because Cenk's nephew presents far more radical on this particular issue than does his uncle, and in that interview, for whatever reason, he decided to talk in this like faux intellectual voice and dress like a cowboy. So if you want me to go back, because that's a little bit further back in terms of time, and do a video on that, let me know down in the comments below. But Cenk, who actually has been pretty decent in condemning Hamas specifically on his channel, is also very pro-Palestinian, very much anti-Israeli, and he's really angry that the media is super pro-Israel. However, Cenk does not seem to be aware of the fact that this is something having to do with American media, and Brits, European media as a whole, are not nearly as pro-Israel as media in the United States of America, which makes part of this interaction even more hilarious. Now, we're going to get into this. We're going to do a deep dive on this interview. We're going to laugh along the way, but before we do, this video is sponsored, so let's frisbee toss it to the sponsor. Then we'll bring it back over here and we'll discuss it on the other side. US debt spike could be setting us up for a long-term rally in gold. Since March of 2020, the federal government has added $8 trillion with a T to the national debt, and over that same period of time, gold is up 50%. To make matters worse, BRICS nations and oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have been meeting, possibly to redirect away from the petrodollar to some other form of currency. It appears that Biden's Build Back Better plan of increased spending and increased regulation is never going to end, and that is likely to slow economic growth. But the thing is, you don't have to panic. You don't have to be left holding the bag. You can actually do something to secure your investments and protect yourself against the oncoming disaster. Call America's precious metal company, National Gold Group, at 866-826-2603 and learn how to secure your investments today. Make sure you mention my channel, Actual Justice Warrior, so that they know that I sent you, and get on the path of securing your future. There is always a risk with any investment, and past performance is not a guarantee of future results.
I've been following your tweets with interest this week. You've been getting increasingly angry, I think it'd be fair to say. You said, "I'm now enormously frustrated by US and Israeli government's barbaric acts in Gaza. I will not be shy in sharing that opinion on Piers Morgan's show today." Why are you so frustrated?
So I just want to point out that Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks is already angry. He's already mad at the top of this segment. He's coming to stand up to Piers Morgan, and that is because Cenk seems to be not aware of the fact that Brits tend to not be as hardcore pro-Israel as people in American news media. So get a load of this tone that Cenk comes out with, and Pierce's response to that, who, by the way, has had a bunch of anti-Israeli figures on his show, including Cenk's nephew.
Well, honestly, I didn't expect the framing that you put on this segment, and it's framing like that, that's disgusting. So I don't see what this has anything to do with anti-Semitism. I formed Young Turks and TYT with two Jewish friends who are some of my friends growing up. We've known each other and been brothers for over 40 years now. So I think what Hamas did is disgusting. I cry for those Israeli innocent civilians. But do I see you guys crying for Palestinians? I mean, Chris Christie was just on here treating it like it's no big deal because what, Palestinian lives don't matter?
So Cenk comes out swinging right out of the gate, and he's angry about a previous segment where Chris Christie was on, because apparently you can't talk to somebody who's pro-Israel before Cenk, and he says, "I don't like the framing of this issue being about anti-Semitism." And I think it is important for us to address that point right off the top, because there are a couple of categories of people who are against the state of Israel, who are backing the Palestinian cause, and one of them is actually distinctly not anti-Semitic, and this, by the way, is a huge portion of the left wing. You see a lot of people who don't come from an Islamic background, who don't seem to have a logical personal connection to this particular story view Israel as an outpost of the West. And because it is an outpost of the West, considered aligned with the United States of America, the blame America types who are not uniquely anti-Semitic go after the nation as a way to go after the United States by proxy. This is where the overwhelming majority of people on the American left wing, the people you see in the streets supporting Palestine, that happen to be the same people that participated in the Black Lives Matter riots, are coming from. Israel is oppressor because, I don't know if you know this, they're aligned with America, the great evil in the world. They hate America, so by proxy, they hate Israel, and it doesn't hurt their cause that Muslims are viewed to be a religion of color, therefore, the Palestinians are the most oppressed. Now, to be clear, even though Israel is the Jewish state and the Palestinian cause specifically, it's in the charter of Hamas, I believe on page 1, is about wiping out Jews from the Holy Land, these people on their own are not anti-Semitic. Let's just be clear about that. Let's be fair about that. This is the case for them.
I think the real bigotry here is saying that Palestinians, we can kill 3 times as many of them already, and this is the appetizer. Netanyahu and his barbaric government have not even started the entree of murder and death and mayhem they're about to do. And that's somehow okay, killing 3 times as many Palestinian civilians.
Now, the next point I want to bring up is this idea that we judge morality by kill count, like Cenk is doing right here. And to be clear, undoubtedly, at this point in time, the Israelis had killed more people within the Palestinian territory of Gaza than were killed on 10/7 in the terrorist attack against Israeli civilians. As far as what percentage of these people are civilians or not, there's honestly no way to know, but we're assuming because it's a very densely populated area that a huge portion of them are civilians. However, that does not necessarily mean that the people in Gaza are the victims in this situation, and the nation of Israel is the perpetrator. They are responding to a terrorist attack from Hamas, which is the government of this particular territory. The Israelis, and you can look this up for yourself, you can see the video, do go out of their way to try to warn civilians to get out of specific areas. However, it is a Hamas strategy to tell people not to leave those areas so that they can hide amongst them in order to launch their attacks, and more importantly, in order to be killed so that they can go to the media and say, oh my God, look at how many people are being killed. Isn't this the saddest thing in the world? Aren't the Israelis super evil? So this is the strategy. This is the talking point of the terrorist organization that runs that specific territory, and Cenk is delivering that, and again, boiling everything down to numbers as if that indicates morality. We killed more Nazi soldiers in World War II than Nazi soldiers killed Americans during World War II. We were morally justified in doing so. We killed more Japanese soldiers in the same war than they killed Americans. Guess what? We were morally justified in doing so. When you are attacked, you go and fight the war against those people.
Let alone the occupation, which is bigotry by definition. We say that everyone in the world can defend themselves, can have their own state, can have sovereignty, except the Palestinians. And the reasoning behind that is the Palestinians are what? They're what? The idea is that they are savages and that Muslims are too violent and cannot control themselves, so they must be occupied for 56 brutal, disgusting years.
So this is one of Cenk's stupid, ridiculous, insane, and asinine talking points about the people in Gaza. Nobody is saying that these people can't govern themselves. That is not a thing. People aren't saying that Muslims can't govern themselves. In fact, Muslims are in control of about 50 plus countries in the world. Now, would I want to live in any of those countries? Absolutely not. But nobody is disputing their ability to govern themselves in that territory. However, in the 1967 war, Israel was invaded by all of its neighbors. They won territory in that war, and then these people ended up as props of Egypt and of Jordan, where they relinquished governing authority to them, to the point where they exist in this no man's land kind of territory. Now, there have been multiple deals being offered by the Israeli side that they've agreed to throughout history, where they can have a two-state solution, and this has been famously rejected by the Palestinian people each and every time. So the idea that, oh, they're saying that they can't govern themselves because they're Muslims and they're violent and all of that is absurd. It's just a made up, stupid, ridiculous talking point put forward by Cenk Uygur. And by the way, we've actually covered this specific talking point in Cenk's debate with Dennis Prager, where in the same debate that Cenk said Republicans being Christian and having their policy goals influenced by their religion is authoritarian, anti-American, and evil.
I can only tell you that when Christians say they want a Christian nation, they want a nation that is governed by Christian moral principles and not the moral chaos that we see today. And I am a supporter of that notion.
Governed means the state.
And I
but
don't
anyway,
believe,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I don't believe in Christ, just for the record. I am not a Christian. And they are not forcing, and they never did force anybody to believe in Christ. Even when they were really in power, they never forced one American to accept Christ. That's a pretty damn good record.
That's because it's not constitutional. You're making it seem like they had the option.
So I want to ask.
Well, wait a minute.
Okay, go ahead.
You just said if they have power, you're afraid, correct?
Well, first of all,
Isn't
no,
that
I
the
didn't say
implication
that.
of what you're saying?
No, I didn't say
Okay,
that. But
so then I hear you
Dennis,
correct.
yeah, I'm worried that your dear leader Donald Trump doesn't believe in democracy. He's gonna. He said he had a system to put in fake electors. Now you got 61% of Republicans say, screw it, let's just be a Christian nation. Let's just stop basically be run by a Christian mullah. Okay, and so do you think Trump wouldn't say I'm that mullah and we're not having democracy? He'd do that in a second.
But them electing Hamas, this terrorist organization, is their choice, and that's a part of freedom.
You believe there is a moral equivalence between Israel and Hamas. That is morally sick.
You are sick for not allowing Palestinians, millions of them, to be free. You don't believe in freedom, Dennis. You believe in oppression as long as it's on your side. Why can't they be free? Why can't Palestinians be free? Because they will choose a government you don't agree with? That is the definition of oppression.
Okay, there you go. Okay, the people heard my position. They heard yours.
Your position is, just to be clear, the Palestinians cannot be free. They are not equipped to handle freedom. Is that your position?
At this point, they would elect Hamas. When Israel left, did what you want and left left Gaza, it ended up being run by the terror organization called Hamas.
So they would elect someone you don't agree with, and hence they are not allowed to have freedom.
So in Cenk's mind, electing an Islamist regime that sole purpose is to destroy their neighbors is totally fine for Muslims because Cenk has no standards for the conduct of Muslims, but Republicans being Christian, that's a no-go, that's horrible, that's terrible.
So I've had enough of the bigotry against Muslims and Palestinians, and I need you to speak out against that instead of covering every outrageous, atrocious action of the right-wing government of Israel.
Now, I also have to laugh because I've seen this clip recently, I've shared it on Twitter, and I'm going to play it for you guys right now because Cenk is doing exactly what Norm Macdonald was making fun of, and I think it's hilarious to see that clip and then see the way that Cenk is talking about this situation to understand the complete and total lack of standards and the elevation of Muslims over everybody else that's being executed by Cenk Uygur.
I can't say my friend's name, but he said his biggest fear is that ISIS or some terrorist group like that would get a hold of a dirty bomb and explode it over a major city within the United States and kill tens of millions of people. Because then the blowback against innocent Muslims would be absolutely terrible.
Because not only are they killing those poor innocent Israelis that didn't do anything, those little babies and the grandmothers, it's disgusting what they did. But on top of that, they're ruining the Palestinian cause. They've burned the moral high ground to cinders. And then on top of that, they smear all people of Muslim background like myself. And then it unleashes this bigotry of anti-Muslim bigotry throughout the world that I'm sick of.
Again, how is that different from what is being done by the American left wing? And again, I give credit because Cenk did condemn the attack specifically, but of course, he wants to talk more about the blowback on the Islamic nation after they commit an act of terrorism against Israel, because again, we always got to worry about the blowback on Islam, and people maybe, possibly, after a terrorist attack, potentially being Islamophobic, because, you know, the real issue is bigotry, not terrorism, not the tolerance for terrorism. It's actually Islamophobia. Shut up, you Islamophobe.
Do you know why Palestinians might not like Israelis? Because they've been oppressed for 56 straight years.
I hear you.
Cenk, the reason they don't like Israelis is because they're Jewish. Let's be clear about that. The reason the occupation happened is because the Arabic nations that surrounded Israel were all going to attack it because they're Jewish. It's not because of the occupation. The war in 1967 predates that 56-year timeline. This is not surprising. And by the way, I actually hope that we do get a 2 or 3 state solution where these bits of territory are carved off and given to the Palestinians, because guess what? Unlike Cenk, who's going to lie directly to your face about the intention of these people, I can actually read polling data, and the polling data shows us that the majority of people in both Gaza and in the West Bank want all of Israel. From the river to the sea is not a joke. They want the Jews out of there. That is their goal. Link in the description if you want to see it for yourself. Even if they got that territory, they're still going to be attacking the Jews because they don't want the Jews in that area. So yes, to be clear, the reason everybody in the Islamic Arabic world is against the state of Israel is because Israel is not Islamic. It is a Jewish state.
I hear you. And let me respond. A, I'm not you guys. I don't think I fit into any neat fit on this issue at all. B, I've actually covered this story, I think, more fairly than most people. I've had many pro-Palestinian voices I've given a huge platform for. They've been getting enormous audiences, from Bassem Youssef to others. And I've done that quite deliberately because I think these voices...
So again, just notice Cenk's disrespect and bad attitude. Piers Morgan names a bunch of Palestinians that he's had on. Like I said in the open, Brits do not feel as strongly as people in American media about Israel. It is just a fact. And he had Cenk's nephew on recently. And by the way, Cenk's nephew says the occupation dates back to 75 years ago because he is somebody who hates the Jewish state as well, wants it eradicated from this earth. And he had him on recently, but Cenk's like, "Oh, move on. I don't want to talk about it. I just want to say everybody's bigoted against Muslims. Oh my God, Muslims killed 1,500 people in Israel. Isn't Islamophobia such a big problem?"
I think these voices are important to be heard, including yours. I certainly wasn't accusing you, by the way, or your organization of anti-Semitism.
Now, I also have to laugh at the fact that Piers said, "I certainly wasn't accusing you or your organization of anti-Semitism." I mean, you're named after the group that committed the Armenian genocide, so maybe you're against Armenians, but, you know, I wouldn't say anti-Semitic.
I just think I have found it, as somebody who's always identified as liberal myself, I've found it very dispiriting to see people who call themselves liberals, whose instant response, it seemed to me, to one of the worst terror attacks we've ever seen was to immediately side with the place where these attacks have been launched from. Now, I don't tar all Palestinians with the brush of being Hamas at all. And in fact, the sooner Hamas are out of there, the better for the Palestinian people and the world. But I just think the only human response you can have is, as you did, by the way, to your credit, is it was disgusting what happened on October the 7th.
Now, Piers gives Cenk credit right there. He says, look, Cenk, you condemned it. He talks about earlier, but as somebody who saw Cenk and Anna's coverage on the Young Turks, I can point to the fact that they condemned the attacks on their show pretty strongly, as good as I've seen many people on the left wing, even though Cenk gave the little caveats then that, oh, this is going to hurt the Palestinians, and Hamas did significant damage to the Palestinian cause, not realizing that Hamas quite literally has stated that their cause is to eradicate Jews, which, by the way, a majority of people in Gaza, facts are facts, do support Hamas. Now, it's not a super majority. I don't want to exaggerate it or anything like that. And that doesn't justify the killing of civilians in that particular area. Obviously, people should look at the horrors of that, just like I suggest you look at the horrors of the 10/7 attack. But to be clear, almost nobody is cheerleading the deaths of civilians in Gaza. However, American leftists, as I played in the clips, are specifically cheerleading the terrorist attacks on the people in Israel. The music festival attack being supported specifically.
And as you might have seen, there was some sort of rave or desert party where they were having a great time until the resistance came in electrified hang gliders and took at least several dozen hipsters. But I'm sure they're doing very fine despite what the New York Post says.
By the DSA in New York and protesters not only around this country, but all around the world. In fact, a new poll came out that showed that ages 18 to 24, over 50% of people in this country of that demographic think that Palestinian grievances are enough to justify the murder of Jews in Israel. So yeah, while people say Israel has a right to defend themselves, while people point out that Israel isn't specifically targeting children or anything like that, they're trying to get rid of Hamas, they're giving advanced warning and all of that, they give all of those caveats in support of Israel's bombing campaign and Israel's invasion. You have huge portions of the American left wing, the overwhelming majority of the Islamic world, specifically supporting the terrorist attacks on Israeli civilians because they're Jewish.
But first, let's look at the unconstructive solution that Israel had. Dropping bombs on residential buildings. 50 ambulances have been hit. 10 out of 25 hospitals don't operate anymore. The incubators are about to run out of energy.
So I've heard a lot about this, the cutting off of the power and the cutting off of the water to the Palestinian territory. The buzzword collective punishment comes up. And apparently, any country who's engaging in a war can no longer engage in a blockade because that's cruel and inhumane. Now, by the way, the PR of cutting off the power, which, by the way, is provided for free by Israel to the people of Gaza, and the water, obviously a bad thing. But I don't understand this logic that if you're at war with a state or a pseudo-state like the Gaza Strip, you have to provide them with resources so they can fight you better. I mean, think about it like this. If you're laying siege to a castle, you don't let food and supplies into the castle because you're just going to be laying siege to the castle forever. So all of a sudden, even though that's a normal tactic throughout war, throughout all of history, these people are entitled to free electricity and free water post an attack while the hostages are being held. I want the hostages released, and I think you can exchange the power and the electricity for the hostages being released. But apparently, no, you can't do that. You just have to give these people everything. Just give them free electricity in perpetuity. Let them live off of your excess and use that time and energy to attack you. That's apparently what they're entitled to in Gaza.
So let me give you a short-term answer, long-term answer. And a lot of people are not going to like these, but these are realistic ways that you minimize civilian casualties. You do what America did with the Osama bin Laden raid. We didn't go drop a nuke on Pakistan. We didn't go destroy 6,000 residential buildings in the middle of Pakistan. We sent in special forces. Is it more dangerous to the special forces? Of course. That's the point of special forces.
Now, look, Cenk says that he has a proper suggestion for this, and that proper suggestion is to send in special forces. And I'm not going to disagree with Cenk on this. I think the bombing campaigns where you tell people you're going to bomb a specific area, and then all the Hamas people end up fleeing that specific area, are very ineffective, and it's good use of propaganda for the terrorists and the terrorist sympathizing side in order to say, oh my God, they're so cruel and they're so evil. I want them to send in the commandos. I would prefer the ground invasion into that territory. And yes, you run the risk of more Israeli soldiers dying, but you have to take over this country with ground troops or this specific territory and get the people that you want to get out, try to rescue the hostages, do what you can. So at this point in time, I completely agree with Cenk Uygur. I mean, it is sensible to use your superior air power to bomb military targets, but the fact of the matter is, you have Hamas, which does want their own civilians to die so that they can use them as props to get sympathy from the world, so you're playing into their hand in that way. So I would actually minimize the bombing campaign specifically and send in the ground troops. You had all those volunteers in the IDF. You should go in and take these people out, try to rescue as many hostages as you can, and remove these people from power. Because the fact of the matter is, more moderate voices are not going to come to the forefront in Gaza because those moderate voices would be killed by Hamas. So even though right now they enjoy a majority support and a majority of the people in Gaza want the Jewish state completely wiped out, they don't want peace. Again, according to the polling, they want a one-state solution where they rule over the Jewish people and they can remove them from this territory. The fact of the matter is, if you want somebody to come into power in order to change their minds, you have to get rid of the radicals in order for that to even be a possibility in this territory.
This is the way to do death and destruction for the sake of death and destruction. It's collective punishment. It's genocide against Palestinians, and the world has to speak out.
Now, I also want to address this point about the so-called genocide against Palestinians, because it's not happening. When Israel got control of the Gaza Strip, when they received this territory and it was conceded to them by the Egyptians, who were attacking them, by the way, in the 6-Day War. Apparently, right of conquest is fine for only Muslims, but it's not okay when they try to conquer an area and they end up losing, then they want a million do-overs. There were about 900,000 people in this territory. There are now over 2 million people. So if the Israelis are doing a genocide, they're doing an absolutely terrible job because their population size has doubled. But again, that goes to the absurdity of the way that people talk about this issue. Hamas has genocide of Jewish people on page 1 of their charter. Wipe the Jews out of Israel, reclaim what they call historic Palestine, even though it's a nation that never existed, for the Muslims. But that, we can't talk about that. We can't talk about the broad support in the Arabic world for these particular people to wipe out the nation of Israel. Nobody's interested in that. I mean, they're chanting from the river to the sea. People are chanting for an intifada and all of that. Nobody discussed that or anything like that. But let's talk about the imaginary genocide that the Israelis are committing against the growing population that has nearly doubled in size since this alleged genocide started.
So my way is not pleasant either. It involves a lot of folks dying on both sides. I understand that. Those are super hard choices. But go find Hamas. Go find the hostages. Go rescue them instead of wantonly, indiscriminately killing after killing. And let's be honest, when you drop a bomb and a kid's head explodes and a grandmother is incinerated, that is terrorism.
Now, Cenk starts talking about how babies are being killed in Gaza. By the way, this is true. This is happening. This is the ugly reality on the ground, and nobody should be trying to obscure that from you. And he calls what the Israeli government is doing as terrorism, saying that it's terrorism when Hamas does it. It's also terrorism when a government does it. And by the way, this exact sentiment is why I believe long-term the Israeli cause is completely lost, because you have people like Cenk who, even though they can condemn the individual terrorist attack, are willfully blind to the genocidal intentions of the side that he's supported, because he's been indoctrinated from a young age to be supportive of that side. And by the way, the indoctrination is aided and abetted by his pivot to the left wing to see the world in oppressed versus oppressor dynamics. The fact of the matter is, Israel should have fought back much harder, much sooner, and one of the worst things that we ever did for the nation of Israel, even though people think it's a great thing, was give them Iron Dome. But because we gave them Iron Dome, which neutralizes the effectiveness of the Hamas rockets, for years and years, they've been tolerating greater instances of initiation of force from the Gaza Strip because they were protected. This weakened them, it softened them, it made them think that these people weren't a serious threat, and rather than doing what was necessary 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when this organization took power in the Gaza Strip, or when it formed even before that, they let the problem grow and let the problem fester, and now you're at a situation where you lost 1,500 civilians due to an organization that you should have taken care of a long time ago, but instead, we sought, as the United States of America, to neutralize the effectiveness of the organization, not realizing that a dedicated, motivated terrorist group was going to eventually get through and be able to commit a heinous atrocity against the Israeli people. The other thing that really hurts the Israelis is the fact that they get attacked by terrorists, and since their military is far more sophisticated, they're able to do significantly more damage to the people in the Gaza Strip, to the people in the West Bank. So immediately, people start calling for a ceasefire after they're attacked. So for years, anytime there was an attack, anytime there was a rocket attack, Iron Dome would take care of it. If something eventually broke through and the Israelis decided that they wanted to respond, then they would try to do it in as minimalistic a way as possible, rather than going into the Gaza Strip, cutting the head off the Hydra that is Hamas, and making the people in the Gaza Strip pick new leadership. If you have the power, don't let your enemies grow to the point where they could eventually break through, but this seems to be the cycle that the Israeli government is committed to, due in large part to international pressure and the sentiment that is expressed by Cenk Uygur. Again, you're attacked, but your military is stronger, so ceasefire, 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 relax, don't do anything. Now, I do agree with Cenk on the ground invasion, on the special forces. I want them to be more precise because it just churns public sentiment against them, but let's be honest, the reason people in the Islamic world hate Israel is not because of Israeli nationalism, it's because they don't want a Jewish state in what they believe is their land, what they're entitled to. And let's be clear, the reason why they keep attacking the superior military power that is Israel is because people constantly call for peace, they constantly call for ceasefires, they constantly call for negotiations amongst the international community. If the people in Gaza, if Hamas knew that they were risking their own personal annihilation, which, by the way, was the standard of warfare throughout the history of the world up until recently, and by the way, specifically when it comes to the Israelis and the Palestinians, they would not be so quick to use force. We keep lowering the consequences for violence against Israel by all of these calls, by pretending that these are magic words that will solve everything, and when you lower the barrier to entry to use force, you lower the cost and consequences for it, you get more of it. Now, I know that there's going to be a lot of disagreement in my audience on this specific topic because Israel, as much as I joke about it being the least divisive issue ever, apparently is ultra divisive for whatever reason. So feel free to disagree, that's totally fine, but I hope you at least acknowledge the complete lack of consistency coming from somebody like Cenk Uygur on this particular issue. Also, leave me a better comment than America shouldn't fight this war for Israel, because that's not something anybody's even talking about. And what I want the United States of America to do in this particular instance is secure the safety of the American citizens that are being held hostage by Hamas. And other than that, I think we all agree that the US military should not be deployed to the Gaza Strip because the Israelis do not need US military personnel in order to invade the territory of Gaza. I think we all get that. We all understand that. Please elevate your commentary below level 0 of the discussion, but let me know what you think about this interview in its totality down in the comments below. Now, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Cenk Uygur and Piers Morgan. Till next time.